Welcome to the New York City Airbnb Hosts. My name is Mike McKay. I help run this meetup. Before we get started, I want to give thanks to our sponsors who help us pay for the space for this event so that we can keep the meetup free. We have two sponsors tonight. The first is Slice, which offers on-demand insurance for vacation rentals. So if you're going away for a short period of time, you can actually buy liability insurance just for that night. I think it's around $8 a night, something like that. So it's kind of good for the people who post part-time. The second is Denise from Denton Cleaning, who's right over there, passing out some swag. Yeah, she does all types of cleaning, including cleaning for Airbnb hosts. So thank you to our sponsors. We really appreciate keeping the meetup free for everyone. And before that, I also want to thank the Sharing League, who's going to be recording this event. It's going to be posted in our Facebook group after. If you're not in a group, I'll send you a link to the Facebook group after, so you can review the video after. And we're also going to send out a copy of the presentation to anyone who signed in tonight. So, that's pretty much it. I'm going to hand it over to Kent Gubrud, who is an Airbnb, or an attorney in New York City who specializes in short-term rental law. He'll get into a little bit more about his background, but welcome, Kent.
Thank you all for coming. Anyways, my name is Kent Gubrud. As Mike said, I specialize in New York City short-term rental law. I'm probably the only attorney in the world who has that specialty, as far as I know. And it's really kind of come about by accident more than anything, because I started off more than 30 years ago as a criminal attorney. And I still do criminal law, but Airbnb law has taken over my life. It's all started in 2012 when I had a real estate company that, I have to give you a little background. My wife and I moved here in 2002. I practiced law for a few years here, hated it, and started a real estate company. And basically stepped away from the law, except for representing my real estate company. In 2012, one of our partners' building was raided by the city of New York. And that's what started my education. Because criminal law, I did a lot. I did administrative law as part of criminal law sometimes. So I had some administrative law experience besides criminal law, but I didn't have any short-term rental law experience. And in fact, most attorneys don't. Most judges have no clue. And so it's a unique area because it involves different things there's like 5 different areas of law that are kind of mixed in together. There's like zoning law, and there's municipal law, and there's constitutional law, and there's criminal law, and there's short-term rental law, there's a multiple dwelling law, and there's the city building code, and there's all these different laws, and it's utterly insane, as I learned. So what happened was, when the building was raided, I wanted to find an attorney who was the most knowledgeable in the area. And I talked to several partners in the real estate business who had used the same attorney, just coincidentally, who turns out to be, he is the second, he specializes in even a more narrow niche than me, because he works only at the ECB. So that's really a very narrow niche, right? Because you got, I don't know how much you all know, so I'm going to have to assume you haven't all been raided by the city of New York lately, and you probably don't know, some of you don't know some basics. So I'm going to try and assume that you don't know anything without spending too much time on stuff. So as some of you probably surely know, the ECB, the Environmental Control Board, is where the city of New York prosecutes short-term rental law violations. It's an administrative tribunal. It has over 200 administrative law judges, which are really just attorneys. They're not, even though it sounds maybe impressive to some, to say I'm an administrative law judge, it's really not that impressive. I mean, any more so than being an attorney. So they literally hire people out of law school who have no real-world experience. They just went to law school, many of them, because they pay dirt. It's like $30 an hour, and it's part-time, and there's no benefits, and they can let you go at will. So people who do this at the ECB can't afford to live in Manhattan, generally speaking, unless they have a family member, a parent they're living with. Because the salaries these people earn tend to be around $30,000 a year, which last I checked can't get you much of a studio apartment anymore. So anyways, it's important to keep this in mind for lots of reasons. But that's where the bulk of the short-term rental law happens. The city does also sue people in court. And then also there's the third place this commonly comes up is in housing court, because the landlords aren't too happy when they get dragged into the ECB and get prosecuted by the city of New York. So those are the three forums that I work in most often. I have gone to the appellate courts. There's a special criminal court for corporations in the city of New York. I've been in the Albany Supreme Court, Albany Appellate Court, the third department. So there's lots of different possible forums, which makes this complicated mess even more crazy. But I'm going to try and not overwhelm you with the detail, because you don't necessarily need to know that. Although you do need to know that this is a very important issue about which forum you're in, because everything changes depending upon whether you're at the ECB or whether you're at the Supreme Court or whether you're at housing court. And those are the only three courts, so-called courts. ECB is not really a court. In fact, it likes to call itself that. If you go on the website, it says the ECB is like a court, just like a court, and enforces the law. But that's a fallacy. The ECB is more accurately known as a kangaroo tribunal that disregards the law whenever possible, unfortunately. So that changes a whole lot of things. Supreme Court is much better, but it varies with which judge you get. New York City Housing Court has a lot of problems. There's corruption in New York City Housing Court that I have had to deal with in a major way. And the crazy thing is there's no remedy in New York for corruption at the housing court, because the Judicial Fitness Commission does not consider them judges. And therefore, they can steal, lie, disregard the law, do whatever they want, collude with your opponent in the back room when you're not there, and there's nothing you can do about it, unless you can convince the district attorney to bring criminal charges. I know, because I caught the judge and my opponent meeting in the back room, entering a judgment against my client when I wasn't there because my family member had died, and I had to reschedule the court appearance, but they went ahead with the court appearance without me, and they entered a secret judgment against us, which I only found out about because of some strange circumstances. So this is all very important, obviously, to understand that your remedies under the law are really depending on your forum you're in and which judge or administrative law judge you're dealing with is sometimes more hypothetical than based on reality. So that's the unfortunate reality that we have to contend with. I did a questionnaire highlighting what I thought are 10 major myths, or I made statements of fact. And what I want to do is to just get a gauge of, I'm sure all of you, because you're here, have heard various things about short-term rental law. And so what I'm hoping to do, it's kind of an experiment for me, I've never done this before, is just to have like a show of hands, people who say, this is true, this is not a myth, or this is a myth, this is false. And so to make it easy, I just stated them in a declarative statement, and then I'd like to just go through them and read them. The first three are kind of like along the same lines, and so I just want to read one and then just have a show of hands. Hopefully you had a chance to look at this a little bit. And then I want to talk about these issues. And first, but let's do the hand thing first, if we can. Okay, so the first statement that I want to ask you to consider and to vote on whether or not you think this is true or false. Since the state legislature amended the state and if you don't know any of this, it doesn't matter. What I'd like you to do, though, is to guess. Okay? This is not nobody's going to, you don't get a grade. Nobody's going to pick on you. Nobody's going to remember tomorrow how you voted. It doesn't matter whether you're right or wrong. I'm simply trying to get at what the beliefs are of this group of people, because theoretically, this group of people should be far better informed than the average person. So that's what I want to just find out and get a gauge for whether or not you think this is true or false by raising your hand. Okay, so, and then I'm going to try and just get a rough guesstimate of how many hands we have. Okay, so, since the state legislature amended the state multiple dwelling law in 2010, New York City has investigated, prosecuted, and fined persons who operate illegal hotels in violation of the multiple dwelling law at the ECB, the Environmental Control Board. Okay, so how many people believe that statement is true? Okay, so a lot. How many believe it's false? Okay, much smaller. Okay. Next question.
Can you tell the answer?
Oh, you want the answer? The answer is false. Yeah, it's false. And there's numerous reasons why it's false. Okay. But I want to go to the first three, because they're all on the multiple dwelling law, and they will touch on this different aspects of the same thing. Okay. Second one, New Yorkers who rent out furnished apartments for less than 30 days create illegal hotels that violate the state multiple dwelling law. True or false? True? Nah, you guys are getting awfully timid here. Looks like only a couple. All right. False? Okay, a lot more people say false. Okay. Third one, New York law prohibits short-term rentals only in a multiple dwelling, which the multiple dwelling law defines as a dwelling containing 3 or more separate units. Consequently, NYC does not investigate, prosecute, or fine short-term rentals within 1 and 2 family units. How many say that's true? How many say it's false? Okay. All right. You guys are definitely better educated. I don't know if I know that I kind of published that in the Meetup thing, so maybe you got a hint there, maybe some of you. But you're absolutely right about that last one. So,
answer to number 2.
Huh? Oh, the answer is false. Number 2 is false. All 3 of them are false. And the reason why they're all false, I will explain to you. The reasons, there's multiple reasons, okay? So first, taking the first one, multiple dwelling law, that they investigate, prosecute, fine people who operate illegal hotels in violation of multiple dwelling law. First of all, the city of New York doesn't prosecute, generally speaking. It's really, at all, people who operate the buildings unless they happen to own them.
Unless the city has to own.
What's that?
Unless the city has to own.
Unless the city
Because they have to own the building, the operator.
Unless the city is the operator of the building?
No, city's doing it. Explain that again. Yeah, just.
Okay, so if you're the owner of a building, let's say one of you in here is doing short-term rentals. Okay, Mayor's Task Force comes into your apartment and issues citations because of those short-term rentals. Who do they give those to? The landlord. Who has to show up at the ECB? Exactly. Not the person. They haven't taken any efforts at all in the past to find out who is doing the short-term rentals. Now they, as you may have heard, very recently they passed the advertising provision of multiple dwelling law, so that has now changed. But in the past, and still today, aside from the advertising citations, they go after the owners of the building. And that's very, very important for numerous reasons. It complicates people's lives tremendously, everybody except for the city of New York. Because what it means is that the owners who are going to the ECB have usually, unless they're the ones doing the short-term rentals, they don't have a stake in this fight, right? They're pissed off because unless they were involved in the short-term rentals themselves, because I'm sure it's a minority of the cases, but maybe I'm guessing 25% of the cases, maybe, it's the actual owner, and 70, if I had to put a number on it, my experience, 75% of them are people who are just renting the apartment in a building they don't own. So in those, if the numbers are right, 75% of the people who are getting impacted by this directly, by their lives, their guests or whatever, they're not invited to the ECB. Not that they want to go necessarily, but it complicates their lives tremendously because the owners are the ones who go, and the owners are the ones who have no dog in this fight usually, and so the owners aren't going to go out and hire some high-priced lawyer or anybody to fight aggressively on their behalf. What are they going to do? They're going to try and settle the case for the least possible amount of money, and that's what the city wants, and that's what the city likes. They like money. So, I'm sorry.
How many people here own their place?
That's a good question.
I'm just curious, who are on short-term rentals.
How many people own the place?
So almost half the room.
Well, I wouldn't say half, but maybe it's
Question, how common is it for the city to actually issue a violation to the owner and actually prosecute them?
Hundreds of times a month. Maybe thousands. I'd say it's more like thousands of times a month if you count all 5 boroughs. These cases are going on. I know an attorney, this attorney I was telling you about, he's just at the ECB. He has 1,000 hearings a month, most of which are short-term rentals, not all of them. He does other stuff. But it's a volume business for the city. And in fact, the ECB makes, in 1 year, lately, makes about $800 million for the city of New York in fines and penalties. And this is also part of the problem. The city of New York doesn't want to give up this golden goose. Big problem. So, okay, anyways, they don't go after the people who operate the hotels, and they also don't go after them for violations of the local government law.
Do they go after for advertising?
Except for now they go after for advertising is multiple dwelling law. But that's that's a small percentage today. So does anybody know where they go after? Oh, let me just first ask, how many of you were at the November meetup on this topic? Any of you? Okay, where there's another attorney speaking? Yeah. And okay, so so most people think multiple dwelling, all right? City of New York, if you look at the citations they write, they don't even mention multiple dwelling. And that's been true as long as I've been doing this, back in 2012. And pretty sure, well, I shouldn't say that. It's possible they started off with the multiple dwelling law because I talked to this attorney, Brad, who I told you about, who works at the ECB, and according to Brad, back in the early days, after the legislature amended the multiple dwelling law, the city was losing a lot of cases. And consequently, they had some big meeting where they decided to get together and come up with a new theory. And I know what their theory is now, but I wasn't at that meeting, so I'm just relying upon, and Brad didn't seem to know what their theory was. But the multiple dwelling law is not cited generally, unless you're charged with the advertising, the new advertising law, they don't mention the multiple dwelling law. What they now mention, and it's varied over the years, because they've actually been doing this for some time now. The first case I'm aware of was started in 2005, long before they changed the multiple dwelling law in 2010. And the reason they changed the multiple dwelling law in 2010 was because in 2009, the appellate court, after judges had approved the city's legal theory, disagreed and said that their theory made no sense, and therefore certain legislators got together and amended the multiple dwelling law in 2010. to try and correct this court decision called 330 Continental, New York City versus 330 Continental. So there's a lot of problems with what the state did back in 2010, and we're probably not going to have enough time to talk about. There's so much to talk about in this area, but the key thing is that the multiple dwelling law, which most people think is the source of the law, isn't. What the city relies upon now is a city law passed in 2012, quietly probably, 28-210.3, and which I can put up on the screen here with that. Okay, so this is the law that the city of New York actually goes after the owners of the building. And I'm sure you can't read it, at least I couldn't read it from where you sit. It's an absolute unbelievable nightmare for anybody to understand. I've been working in this area for a year, and I had to read it like 4 times and spend a lot of time looking up the laws, because what it does is it cites all these different laws without really specifying what part necessarily they're citing. And this mess has a lot of problems with it. Constitutionally, it's incomprehensible. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't support the city's legal theory. But this is what the city relies upon, because, and I can tell you that probably none of the administrative law judges of the ECB have a clue of what this thing means because of the way they operate. They cite laws, and the people who write the tickets, right? The people who are charging people with these tickets, these massive tickets themselves are like electricians, people who do concrete work their whole life. They're not even lawyers, and not only that, they're not the least bit familiar with, they haven't been to the first year of law school, they probably haven't been to college, they've been digging ditches or plumbing houses for their careers. And these are the people who are citing people with laws they couldn't understand if you asked them. I have asked them, and they don't understand them. But that's not because they're dumb. If you read the law, no reasonable person who can understand that mess unless you spend a lot of time looking up other laws and trying to piece it together. And when you do understand what it means, it doesn't support what the city says it says.
Convoluted.
What's that?
Convoluted at best.
Oh, at best. So,
Can I ask, who are these people?
I'm sorry?
Who are these contractors who are citing us?
well, until they got the infusion of cash, they had 2 guys, Pugash and Parcheski, both of whom barely speak English. And they're from like Yugoslavia or Bulgaria.
Are they in task force?
And I'm not sure that they can read. I'm not being funny. I really am not sure. When they talk, you're sitting right there, and it's hard to understand what they're saying in supposed English. These are the people who write the tickets, who are interpreting this crap, and it's crap. So,
What size are the tickets?
what's that?
What size are the tickets?
What size are the tickets?
Yeah, how much?
Well, it depends. So the tickets start off the first time. They have. Okay. There's so many crazy things going on here. The tickets. There's a list of 1,000 different. I'm picking a large number. I don't know what the actual number is. A very large number of citations they can choose to cite you on. And so it's not really necessarily possible to know what you're going to be cited with. And the one thing they all have in common is they don't apply to residential buildings. Okay? So this is what the city fabricated, the legal theory they came up with. The legal theory that they have is that a residential apartment, if anyone uses it for less than 30 days, and I don't mean necessarily renting, I mean using it, that when the city finds out, if the city finds out that the entire building, not just the unit, the entire building has converted to a hotel, retroactively to the date of the short-term use. This is their theory. See if that makes any sense, okay? Because this is not written down anywhere. You cannot find this anywhere, but that's their legal theory. So they're saying, poof, your building became a hotel retroactively to the date of the first short-term use.
Then wouldn't that indeed be an implied law is what the government has been doing for quite some time?
I'm sorry, say that again?
I said, then would that not indeed be another one of their implied laws, never written, but
Yeah,
no one
which is a
challenged it?
violation of due process.
That's right.
The whole thing is made up, it's in thin air. But if you read this, you will not know that, because it's incomprehensible. Yeah.
Does that only apply to the city of New York or also to the state of New York that made that 30 days retroactive?
That's the city of New York's theory.
Not the state.
No, and the multiple dwelling law doesn't apply. I believe a city has to have a population of 350,000, and therefore, even the state multiple dwelling law doesn't apply to most cities. It only applies to New York City. I think Buffalo might have sufficient. No, not Buffalo. One other city.
It doesn't consider multiple dwelling unless you're 4 units and above. If you
3 units and above.
It's supposed to be 4 units and above to be a multiple unit dwelling.
No, 3 units.
No, on the books, you go on to DHCR and
Yeah.
you go on to the technical definition.
Oh, yeah?
They say 4 and above is multiple in New York.
That's
It's
interesting.
different.
The multiple dwelling law says 3 units, so, but I'd like to see that. I'd like to see that.
However, I was sitting in a village hall meeting out in Long Island for a local village. They went back to the New York City because they wanted to pass laws to ban Airbnb in the village. They went back
Yeah.
to all the states.
That's a common thing. There are a lot of the smaller cities that are trying to. Yeah.
Even though they don't have the underlying law.
Yeah, well, New York doesn't have the underlying laws either, it doesn't stop them. But the reason they can get away with it is because of the ECB. The ECB is rigged. It's designed to be rigged. It's utterly crazy. I spent 10 months, okay, I should tell you a little bit more about my background besides, so I just got rated. I went to this attorney who was the expert, as far as my partner said, because he's in the ECB. He started off working for the city, and then he shifted to working to represent individuals. And at the time, in 2012, that I met him, he had been doing this for 9 years. And he has, like I said, 1,000 hearings a month at the ECB in all 5 boroughs. And so I thought, this man's got to know more than anybody on the planet. And this is the guy I got to talk to find out, So I asked him, I said, my first question is, Brad, you're the man, tell me, how does a residential apartment building become an illegal hotel? And anybody want to hazard a guess on what he said?
I don't know.
That's what he said. I don't know.
It's random.
He said, I can only tell you what the city says.
How do they count for legal roomers, boarders, lodgers, someone that can use a personal residence for less than 30 days legally without having to be a hotel? How do they count for that?
It's out of being a hotel, what do you mean?
So, like, I'm pretty sure, I'm sure if I'm wrong, but you can allow a roomer, a boarder, a lodger, or even a family member to stay for less than, I think, 28 days without charging them or charging them, and not have to convert your home into a temporary use facility, et cetera, et cetera. So how do they account for that?
You mean, what's the law that says that?
No, so what's the law that says that, like, when you go and say these fines are null and void, they're invalid because it was a family member, it was a roomer, a boarder, a lodger, how do they say, well, it wasn't?
Basically, what would you do if the client had that situation?
I have, many times.
Yeah.
And the thing is that the
You look for
ECB,
your listing.
the problem is that the ECB doesn't care about the law. So I've had multiple people who have been prosecuted successfully at the ECB before actually my very first case, I take that back. I had cases where that is exactly the facts, and they have been prosecuted successfully at the ECB. Now there was a case, the first case you may have heard of, for those of you who are really knowledgeable about the history, there was a case in 2014 where the judge at the ECB, administrative law judge, ruled that, it got a lot of publicity, the judge ruled that that it was illegal for this person to rent out their room while they were traveling for work. Does anybody hear about this case at the ECB?
Nigel something?
Yeah, Nigel Warren, that's it.
Yeah.
So the administrative law judge came up with this crazy theory. And what was interesting about this case is that it got so much press, like by the New York Times and a whole bunch of different papers. They all showed up for the initial hearing. And Airbnb's hired a lawyer from a big law firm called Gibson Dunn to represent him, and he didn't even know it. The lawyer showed up at the ECB to represent this guy, and he's like, "Oh, I have a lawyer now." And the guy was actually representing the landlord, so Airbnb was representing the landlord. So Gibson Dunn was the same law firm that represented George Bush in Bush v. Gore. It's an international law firm. These guys, their partners make millions of dollars a year. And they did a big brief, they filed with it, and the ECB administrative law judge came up with this cockamamie theory that made absolutely no sense. But nonetheless, they lost, and then Airbnb called me up, and I helped them with the appeal, which they won, but it wasn't necessarily because of my great legal skills. In my opinion, I think what happened was that the media attention is what scares the ECB. They're not afraid of lawyers because lawyers have no chance. You can have the best lawyer in the world, and you're still going to lose at the ECB most likely because it's rigged. And if you want more information, it takes a lot. My brief was 50 pages long on just summarizing the different ways the ECB rigs the process so you have no chance. For one thing, I'll give you some of the really interesting fun facts. The ECB is obviously the ECB is operated by the City of New York. The City of New York is a government body. The government body has to comply with the Constitution. Anybody disagree with that? All right. ECB does. The City of New York does. The City of New York says state and federal constitution don't apply to the ECB. Yeah. I didn't believe it. Brad told me this. Besides telling me that he didn't know how a legal hotel came about, he told me that the ECB doesn't recognize the state or federal constitution. I didn't believe him. I had been, practicing law enough to know that sounded absurd. That's like, that got big news in Alabama when, remember Roy Moore, who just lost the election? Yeah. As a judge, he ruled that the Constitution, that he wasn't going to follow the federal Constitution. It created this massive national uproar. How can the judge disregard the federal Constitution? It's absurd. It's crazy. It's the City of New York. In my brief, I cited 14 different decisions of the ECB where they say that they're not going to follow the Constitution. They don't say it that succinctly. Well, they do. They make it sound better than it really is. What they say is the City of New York doesn't have jurisdiction to decide constitutional issues, which means the police officers can bust your door down, rape your dog, steal your money, burn your house down, and then cite you for having a guest in your house. And none of that matters because the Constitution doesn't apply to the City of New York. And those are rather extreme facts, but I can tell you that they do that all the time, not the raping of the dog. But at least I don't know of that yet. But they do break into houses constantly. They designed, this is the thing, Mayor Bloomberg created the mayor's task force with a flick of a pen, without ever going to the city council, which he's required to do under the city charter, to get approval for the reorganization of the city government, which is what he did in his executive order. That was in 2006. The mayor's task force was built so they could avoid getting search warrants. They take building inspectors and they mix them with police officers and fire officers, and they show up at the door and they tell you there is a fire emergency, we've had a complaint, we need to get into the building.
Do you have a proposal for what we should do? Because it seems like a real opportunity. There's so many people who are experiencing this. They came to my house. It was very threatening.
Yep.
And I'm in a two-family home. It's legal. I live there. It should be legal. So how do we use this opportunity now? Because it's clear that trying to fight it through legal channels is useless.
Well, no, fighting at the ECB is useless. Not in Supreme Court, which is where it needs to go, or federal court. And this is what I'm planning on doing. I probably would have done it by now had Trump not won the election allegedly.
Allegedly.
So, 15 minutes?
15 minutes.
Oh, okay. All right. There's so much to talk about. We'll have to talk about what to do, but court action is definitely needed because the ECB makes too much money and the city of New York doesn't care. They don't care that they violate your rights as long as they get their money. That's what it comes down to. And the only way you can stop them is by going to court. And I've done that. I've been there. In fact, this is, I took on, if some of you have heard about the case Airbnb and the Attorney General, the Attorney General subpoenaed Airbnb's records back in 2013.
Yeah.
Well, I warned Airbnb about this like 3 or 4 months before it happened, because I had a friend who worked in the state law department, and they knew they were building a case against Airbnb. And so they told me, and I told Airbnb. And I also educated on Airbnb. I spent 3 months researching the question of how an apartment, because no lawyer I talked to could tell me that very basic question. It was crazy. How does an apartment building become an illegal hotel? I spent 3 months, and after 3 months' time, full time, I went back, I rented an office, I got a legal database. 3 months' time, I still had no clue because there was no case law that supported it, there's no statute, there's no regulation, there's no court decision, there's ECB decisions, but their ECB decisions are written at the second level. And at the second level, it's written anonymously, and they're not even lawyers, probably. It's like my 16-year-old son could write far better than these opinions that were, you wouldn't be surprised if they were written in crayon. I'm slightly exaggerating, but they are very, very poorly written. And they're not legal arguments. They don't cite laws because they don't recognize the Constitution. They don't recognize statutes. They don't recognize court decisions. The only thing they recognize are their own opinions.
Well, we got that community movement.
Yeah, why are we here? What do you propose we do? We're active and ready to go. If you
They have to be sued. They have to be sued big time. I'm federal class action sued, perhaps. I have 2 different people who are getting sued right now in Supreme Court, and maybe suing the city very soon.
How many people are required for class action?
I mean, I think
One.
one of the first things that people should know is that they do not need to let them in.
What's that?
That you don't need to let them in.
Well, that's right. That's right.
You could tell.
Unless they have a search warrant.
Oh, yeah.
But they almost never get a search warrant.
But a neighbor can let them in. Look, you can ask the people, do you have a search warrant?
Yep. Okay, I want to play you, for those of you.
Another thing is this.
Okay, I'm sorry, I got very little time.
We'll have 15 minutes for questions at the end.
Yeah, can we just hold on to our questions?
I want to play you something. This has never been played because my client wouldn't allow it. But we have to turn off the video cameras to play it because it's still the reasons why he can't. He doesn't want to broadcast. But this is. I told him if the mayor's task force shows up to videotape it. But I think this video gives you a flavor of the kind of attitude that the mayor's task force frequently demonstrates. I've had multiple clients who...
Let's hold on to the question at hand, please.
I have a few of them also if you want. Videos of like issues of the city also, everything is recorded. I have like 5 or 6 of them in here what they say. Because like they don't know they're being filmed and so on. So
yeah, exactly. Okay, so I've had multiple clients. So I'm going to play 2 different ones actually. One of them, this is a lawsuit that I was involved in where they had a video camera up on the wall. There's no sound, but this is just you can see that he grabs him by the neck and forces him into the apartment. Let's see. Okay. I think that's gives a pretty good demonstration of the kind of force you can use. The building, my first building, they showed up on a fire truck, a team of them, sirens blaring, lights, and they bang on the door and they terrorize the tenants.
You speak at all
When
to,
someone comes at you like that and says, I need to know who's in this apartment, if that building has registered certificate of occupancy, you're supposed to know who's there. So that should have shut that down right then and there.
Yeah, well, they're not, the whole thing is designed to make it fast and convenient, and they don't want to, they can't get a search warrant most times because they get anonymous calls many times, and you have to have a named person sign an affidavit to go before a judge to get a search warrant. So they just, okay, so I think I've already answered this to some degree, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So, because furnished apartments are subject to the same fire and building codes as regular hotels, and the owner of a New York City dwelling is willing to install the exact same fire and building safety equipment as a regular hotel, New York City will not prosecute rentals for less than 30 days. How many think that's true? You guys are too smart. You're right, it's false. This is all fabricated. This whole thing is this magic notion that you become a hotel is New York hits its heels. And there's no basis in law or fact for that.
what are they finding those buildings with? What are they finding the buildings that meet hotel code with?
Let's really hold the questions to the end so we can.
We're at the tell you, they tend to pick on a few things like lack of egress, because a hotel has to have 2 exits on every floor. I've seen, we had 9 tickets in ours, and when I questioned the building inspector, he couldn't tell me. There's no constraints. There's basically a list of hundreds, or even, I remember the number he gave me. But they can pick and choose as they want, and they do. So it's hard to say, but there tend to be a few: egress, fire alarm, smoke alarm, uninterrupted power supply, things like that. Okay, so let's see. The city charter requires the Department of Building has the exclusive authority to enforce building codes. This is one more thing that Bloomberg's executive order violates, because he basically makes the police the enforcers. As you can see, this is how they get in. They intimidate people. This guy, he's knowledgeable. I informed him that they have to have a search warrant. He should have brought it up, but he didn't. But he also has legal training. He's actually a lawyer. But, even you can tell in his voice, it changes from the beginning to the end. Very intimidating to have 4 thugs with no necks and badges trying to get into the apartment. So imagine some tourist who barely speaks English, who doesn't speak English, who's there, has no clue what's going on. 90% or more of the time they get into the buildings using this kind of tactics, and they're all illegal. Let's see. Okay, so... Okay, I'm good, because this time is so short, I'm going to have to cut to the chase a whole lot of stuff. So I tried to intervene in the case with Airbnb, and the judge wouldn't let me in. This is a brief I filed. I had people who were too afraid. I had to go out and find a client. I went to Airbnb meetings to solicit a client, and I actually almost had to pay her because I told her I'd help her with her own. She was getting evicted by her landlord, and I ended up going to trial in her case. I told her and won, but I had to bribe her to become my client because everybody was so afraid of going against the Attorney General. And so this is the brief that I filed. These are the exhibits that I filed that are referenced in my brief. And this took a lot of time, as you might imagine. For this client, I had to solicit, basically.
Copies available?
This was, no, the Airbnb files all the Supreme Court. This, I don't know. I generally haven't given out. When people retain me, then I generally will let them see my briefs. But otherwise, this is like $2 million in legal work. And then some lawyer comes in and goes, oh, yeah, I like your brief. So the second case, big case, I'll tell you that the judge wouldn't let me into the case. And the reason why is because Airbnb has these contracts that you sign. You click OK online when you sign up for Airbnb. And basically, they're like 100. Anybody ever read the contract?
No. Yes. Nope.
I see 1 hand, 2 hands. Anybody? 3 hands? Very, very few people read these contracts, right? You click on the button. But if you read those contracts, they say, in the event of a lawful subpoena, Airbnb can do whatever it wants. I'm summarizing. but literally it says, if anything, they can do anything. And so because of this, the judge said, my client has no legal rights because they gave him up to Airbnb. And Airbnb's lawyers did whatever they wanted. Even though they didn't raise the arguments, I actually, they wanted my research, and I said, well, Airbnb is like $1 billion company, then you can pay for my work that my client didn't pay me for. They didn't want to pay for it. What? But they're too cheap. And they didn't do anything. I warned them, they didn't do anything. Except they took on that Nigel Warren case, which they lost initially. But anyways, Airbnb filed this lawsuit to quash the subpoena of the Attorney General served. Then Airbnb technically won by an overbroad argument. But it was really a technicality. The Attorney General just revised the subpoena the next day, and Airbnb came. So anyways, I ended up organizing, okay, I'm happy to cut, just give me 2 minutes. Okay, so Airbnb, as you probably know, some of you, agreed to give them whatever they wanted, although they coached it as we're redacting the data. But in the fine print, it said that they would comply with anything that they requested within 10 days. And so in August, like 4 or 5 months after they came, the Attorney General sent a request to Airbnb demanding the records for 130 superhosts, the ones they were most interested in, they claimed because they made the most money. So because of this, Airbnb had 10 days to comply. So they gave their host, they sent an email, 5 o'clock or so on a Friday afternoon, that they wouldn't turn over their records if they filed a lawsuit within 7 days, so the following Friday, and sought an injunction against them to stop them. And I ended up organizing a group of about 25 superhosts, and we sued Airbnb. And Airbnb brought the Attorney General into the case, so we were fighting both of them. And then I ended up representing 2 other clients, a married couple and a single client, at about the same time. And so I was taking on the Attorney General with one of those other cases, besides the city of New York, and we ended up winning. We stopped the Attorney General, as many of you probably don't know. Many people have heard about the Attorney General's subpoena, but they didn't hear about, the Attorney General didn't do a press release when they quit in 2015. And the reason they quit is because, I believe, they never came out and admitted it, but given the timing and the documents, it was shortly after I produced my brief for them and summarized why they have no legal leg to stand on. And so they said, we quit. And even the people who were cooperating already with the Attorney General, they said, never mind, go away, we quit. Go see the city of New York. We're turning everything over to them.
And I think we're kind of running out of time for the presentation here, but before we start the questions, I know a lot of people have one big burning question in the room, like what specific actions can hosts in the New York City area take to maybe either reduce their chances or maybe to fight this in the future?
Okay. Yes, this is good because the problem has been that the people, it costs so dang much money, and most people are afraid of the city and the Attorney General. And so I have actually come up with what I think is a very exciting plan because, this client didn't pay me, but had I billed her for my time, it would have been over $1 million, I'm sure. It would have been well over $1 million. And the time it took me to write this and research. I was working 80 hours a week for 4 months, and that was after I'd already done over a year's worth of research. So this is the problem. So my solution is I'm building a new website, and I have an app built. It's not finished. I was hoping to have it finished by tonight, but it's not. But it's for various reasons. This is the app, and it's 3 levels. And depending on, there's a free app, and then there's the one that's going to be a mid-range, and then there's going to be the higher, you call it gold, silver, and bronze to make it easy, right? So this is actually a video he sent me because it's working, but it's not finished yet. But so anyways, there's various things that will be offered at the mid-range level that will be very, very useful for people. Like, I don't know if any of you have ever been involved in a listserv, but it's where people can communicate to one another. Everybody's going to have to be verified to be a host before they can join up. It's not going to be just anybody, because the City of New York might want to join up. And so when you join up and are verified, you will be able to communicate using, you use a screen name anonymously still, but people will be able to communicate with other hosts about what's going on. Because part of the problem, there's several problems here. Problems of money, that people have to come up with so much money to fight this stuff. And there's very few lawyers understand it. Very, very, very few. And the other problem is you're all fighting by yourselves, right? Everybody's alone. And while the City of New York is organized, they got high-tech stuff. They use special software to track people. Very sophisticated operation, and they got tons of money. So this is why the City of New York, and they have the whole thing rigged. I can prove all this stuff. I don't say this. This is because this is what this is about. And I want to cover also the hotel tax thing real briefly because we have so little time. Hotel taxes, how many people believe that you could owe hotel taxes or should owe hotel taxes for short-term rentals? Or less than 6 months. Okay, that's right. This is a myth that the City of New York has perpetrated, and I took on the City of New York on their investigation after the Attorney General. They were going after I was demanding documents from a Freedom of Information request. They started an investigation because of me, and then they ended it because of me, because I proved to them that they have no legal basis to stand on. So they won't come out and admit it. They say that their reason for stopping their investigation was because they're such nice people and are concerned about the quality of the investigation of the Attorney General. That was their reason for doing it. But in actuality, there's no legal basis for the whole hotel tax nonsense.
So we do not owe hotel taxes?
That's correct. Or sales tax. And that's because there is a city law that says that. They have tried to do that. Bloomberg did this in 2003. There's something called the state bungalow exemption. And this has been around in common law, in court systems since, I think, the 40s. And then it became part of, so there's various cases, state court cases that deal with it. And then also the state tax code incorporates this definition of a bungalow and says that they're not taxable. And so the City of New York doesn't like state law, nor does the hotel industry. And therefore, Bloomberg got very creative and took away the city's bungalow exemption in 2003 and reclassified bungalows as hotels. So if you look at the booklet from the tax department, the New York City Department of Finance, they recognize that their law doesn't coincide with the state law. And they said, oh, well, I don't remember the language they used, but this is not a reason to not pay your hotel taxes, that our law is different. It is a good reason for two reasons. Number one, the City of New York, under the Constitution of New York, has no lawful right to pass any tax without state approval. They never got state approval. This was the head of the Department of Finance who did this. Secondly, the city's law conflicts with state law, which the city cannot do unless the state allows them to conflict, which then doesn't conflict, because the state says you can conflict. So really, city law conflicts radically with state tax law. And therefore, they define a furnished apartment as a hotel, unlike state law that defines it as tax exempt, unless it offers the amenities of a hotel, which the state tax department, as of 2014, had never found to be the case in numerous decisions.